Hi, we're here at Manatee Community College Fine Art Gallery, and I'm happy to introduce you to artist Eleanor Merritt, who is our featured artist here in the exhibition Color Matters. Eleanor, thank you for being here. Would you please tell us a little bit about your artwork?
Okay, thank you very much, Joe, and appreciative of this time to talk a little bit about this show. The title of the show is Color Matters, and it inspired me to work in various types of mediums and also to work with different color schemes and color patterns. Typical of my work, it's mostly figurative, and in this show I concentrated completely on images evoking scenes of Africa and the Caribbean. This particular piece is entitled Akan, A-K-A-N, and it's referencing a tribe in Ghana, and it's indicating with gold accents the important aspects of that tribe, in that they wore incredibly elaborate costumes and adornment of gold. This piece is done with a mixed media technique, which is using collaging of fabric as well as different kinds of papers. So each surface becomes very rich with textural complements. And that's how I approached the title Color Matters. In each piece that we discuss today, I will talk about the various color schemes that I used in each piece.
We are now standing in front of a painting entitled Three Queens by Eleanor Merritt. Eleanor, this is a particularly vibrant painting with lots of symbolism and hidden symbolism, I understand. Would you mind talking to us about some of the reasons why you use your symbolism and the color choices and so forth?
Thank you. This is a piece that is entitled Three Queens, once again referencing African themes and African history. It's using a multimedia approach of layering of fabric and textural elements, over which I have added acrylic paint. The images of the three queens sometimes are difficult to see. I like the viewer to look into my work and analyze the painting a little bit more in depth. So at first glance, we see the two heads here, which are very symbolic of African masks. I use African masks a lot in much of my work because I do collect masks. And then you have to sort of really look further to see the third head. And the tension has been created between the third head, which is very close to us, and these two, which are further away. So I've created a sense of depth here in the composition with this profile of the head and then the segmented use of those two masks in the distance. It's a very rich piece. I've limited the color scheme, again, thinking color matters. So it's basically using yellow, accents of white, and tones of brown. I think the piece itself has a very warm feeling.
Eleanor, we're in front of your painting, your oil pastel rather, entitled Selling Cloth. And the thing I notice about this image is that it's in stark contrast to the colors and the tone of Three Queens. Can you talk about some of those differences?
Yes, I had wanted to incorporate in this show a number of different styles, even though I was working with the images based on African memory. I traveled to Africa some years ago, but the images have stayed with me. So this particular piece is introducing a technique on using oil pastel by covering the surface of the paper with a textural medium, that you can use the pastel in such a way that it leaves a very rough finish. I liked that, and I also liked the vibrancy of the colors that I was able to achieve. And also the positioning of the figures is typical of a market day in any town in Africa where women sit around in these beautiful garments selling incredible bolts of cloth. So I wanted to honor that experience in this particular composition.
Well, that's interesting. The thing that occurs to me, this painting, unlike the Three Queens, which is very specific in terms of the masks and the visages, the faces in this image are much less specific and a bit almost anonymous, if you will. How come you have made them less specific than in your last painting?
Very often, and I'll talk about that in other images as well, I feel it's not necessary to give features. I think by just suggesting the face, I'm still repeating that mask concept. It's not necessary, I don't think, for me to put eyes and lips and nose. So the faces are suggested, and I think it works with the way in which the composition flows.
We're now standing in front of Carrying Firewood by Eleanor Merritt. Eleanor, I wanted to ask you about the beautiful decoration that we see throughout the painting here. Can you talk a little bit about what technique you're using?
Well, this piece is again a figurative piece, only this time it's a single figure. One of the images that I've carried in my head from having visited Africa is the image of women who seem to be able to balance incredible loads as they work. And one of the images of balancing a load was this one of a woman carrying a large bundle of firewood. The firewood is indicated by textural pieces that I've added to the canvas. And I wanted this figure to be very strong, and I wanted her to look as if she was really walking with strength, so she's kind of solid. Working as I do, the image evolves. I don't start with a sketch, I just start painting. And as I begin to work, the image emerges. And that's how this piece emerged. I use a kind of an oval circular pattern sometimes in my paintings, as I've accented here in white. And this also has a lot of texture on it in the dress that the figure is wearing, accents on the skirt and on her head wrap. She doesn't need features either, because we see her profile as a very strong profile. So that's another reason I don't think it's necessary to put eyes and features and details. I think it's powerful enough as it is.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up too, because when we were talking about the features, it seems as though you give enough suggestion where one can sort of fill in the features without the features being necessarily specific.
Exactly. This is a piece that I think is very rich in textural detail. There's a lot of movement in it as well, and just a suggestion of a village in the background, because I wanted the focus to be on the figure and on her great load that she's carrying.
Do you mind talking a little more specifically about the actual method that was used to create this texture?
Well, you use papers, different fabrics, which I have applied here and here. And then I do something which I called extending the pattern. So I've extended the patterning on this piece of fabric. And simply using this textured paper, I simply shaded it with paint to create the three-dimensional shadowing and the three-dimensional effect. The actual surface, this was a canvas onto which I applied paper, different kinds of paper, to give that very rich textural feeling that you see.
We're now in front of Tribal Markings 2, a small and enigmatic painting. The thing that interests me about this piece, Eleanor, is I didn't initially see the subtle face that reveals itself out of this central rectangle. Can you talk about that?
Yes, this was one of the pieces that I wanted to show features, but in a different context. In Africa, there are many tribes that use what is called scarification as a form of beauty, as we would entitle them beauty marks. But in their culture, it's a sign of marking the skin. So this piece shows a close-up of a woman who's wearing sort of a diffused white turban that not only covers her hair and the top of her head, but also is draped around. And I use that to frame the face. In other words, to really accent the contrast between the white and the inner triangle or the inner rectangle. And I've used the texture of the paper underneath to bring out the texture of the scarification on the forehead, on the cheeks, on the neck, and then just barely suggesting the eyes, the nose, and the mouth.
Well, now let me ask you, were you inspired by African sculpture in any way? Because this piece has a real solid, almost a sculptural solidity to it. And or else I'm wondering if it was just sort of something that you conjured out of your imagination.
Well, you know, as an artist and as an everlasting student, I have studied a lot of cultures, and African culture being my most favorite. I've also indulged in Native American culture and other cultural idioms, but learning about the scarification through my studies inspired me to do this piece and to use that concept in my own form of a design in this particular painting. So it's a portrait in a sense, if you wish to say that.
Eleanor, we're now in front of 5 kings. Would you tell us a little bit about this painting?
This piece is very similar to 3 Queens, as I'm sure you've noticed. I'm using the same technique of multimedia layering, using various types of papers. This image is very vertical. There's no curvilinear lines in it. It's very angular and it's very vertical and very sharp. The angles are very sharp. The 5 kings are hidden. Once again, I think everyone will see these 3, but I like you to look further, and here's the 4th one, and then here's the 5th one. They're all wearing a crown. They're wearing some kind of a crown, symbolic again of kingship, of the African culture, and the garments that they're wearing are not really that clear. They are more or less just made up of lines and shapes and colors. I've used the same kind of color scheme here, which is basically warm colors, yellows, oranges, browns, and dark tones in the same color scheme. This next painting is similar in technique. It's using the multimedia technique of a tap-a-cloth and fabric glued down. This one's a little bit more abstract, and it's another seek and discover painting. The title of this piece is Totem, and it's again very vertical with patterns and shapes. But if you look closely, once again, you will see different faces appearing out of the composition, emerging, requiring the artist to have you look further than just the surface pattern technique. Now we come to a painting that I'm sure you will notice, Joe, is quite different from the others.
Quite different. It's very bright in palette rather than the sort of earth tone pieces we were just looking at.
Well, keeping in mind the theme of the show, Color Matters, I wanted to give you these accent pieces, which are in this particular grouping. This piece is referencing dancers, and it's called Wolof dancers. Looking carefully, you will see the female figures in their heads up above, and then their gowns or their garments are just sort of swirling around as many beautiful people in tribes in Senegal and other parts of Africa wear these very flowing, colorful garments. I was trying to capture that. And the accent of the white also emphasizes that.
Before you move on, I wanted to ask you, because the other thing that occurs to me is that you're using a different medium here than you were in the other two paintings. This is more of a sort of fluid watercolor medium?
This is a combination of acrylics, inks, and watercolor. So there is no collaging here. There is no buildup of the surface. This is basically a water-based painting.
And in terms of time, this painting seems much more spontaneously executed.
It is very much so. I wanted to capture that. I wanted to feel the movement of the women as they were dancing and moving, and I wanted to keep that spontaneity. I'm glad I have.
Now tell us a little bit about this painting. Now this is more monochromatic than the last painting, yet it's still more colorful than some of the other paintings we were looking at.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I use a lot of masks in my work. I'm constantly looking at masks and studying masks coming from ancient cultures in Africa and other parts of the world as well. And this piece is a kind of a montage of different kinds of masks. Once again, you have to really look into the painting to see them. We see this one, which is pretty obvious, perhaps this one, and then there are others hidden throughout the composition. I've done it in tones of purple, and I've used white to accent certain parts of the painting. But this is a water-based acrylic painting using inks as well. There's no collage, there's no buildup of the surface.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about the subject? Is this a family? Is this a tribe? How do you think of this grouping?
Well, actually, all of these masks are from different cultures. There's no relationship from any one to the other. They're all different cultures. And the symbol of this particular figure in the middle with the arms outstretched is a symbolic doll that's used in Ghanaian cultures. It's called an Akwaba doll. So that's the name of this piece. It's Akwaba, A-K-U-A-B-A.
Well, then what's the significance of the Akwaba?
The Akwaba doll was and is used, perhaps, but was used in ancient times in Ghana as a symbol of fertility. Women who wished to bear children would keep these dolls and even wear them in hopes that they would be able to conceive a child. So it's a very ancient symbol. And if you look at it, it looks very much like the Ankh, which is referencing Egyptian culture.
We're now standing in front of one of Eleanor's more significant paintings entitled Metamorphosis. Eleanor, tell us a little bit about this painting.
This piece is also using multimedia techniques by layering of different kinds of papers over which I have painted with acrylics to indicate three figures. Metamorphosis, the title, is indicating the change that takes place symbolically in life. And as we see in the figures themselves, they are also changing. So the piece is about changing physically, changing emotionally, changing who you are from this piece, from this figure to this piece. There's different changes that take place. Once again, the faces are not very clear except for the last face, and that face is pretty clear in the final.
Now, as far as metamorphosis is concerned, whose metamorphosis is this? Is this...
Could be mine. It could be mine. It could be someone looking at it, relating to it. I think it's very personal, perhaps, that it is mine because as an artist, I have changed considerably in the way in which I work. From the beginning of painting 50 years ago to where I am now. And I think it's significant to make that point that artists change and artists grow and develop in their careers.
Well, that's an interesting point because you've been influenced by a lot of significant artists throughout your training. Ad Reinhardt, Jimmy Ernst, Mark Rothko. I can't help but see some influence by these artists in this painting. Can you talk a little bit about your change and metamorphosis from sort of their style into sort of recognizing and developing your own personal style?
I think the most major evolution has been the fact that when I first started painting, I was an oil painter and I painted very realistically. And I think the lessons that I was getting from Mark Rothko and Jimmy Ernst and so many of the artists that I studied with was to let loose of realism and to paint more what was within you, what was more personal. And I think I've tried to achieve that.
I think you've done it with wonderful success. And interestingly enough, this painting was purchased, was it not, by Dallas Ernst, the wife of
My
artist
former professor, which
Jimmy
is
Ernst.
the best compliment that I could ever get.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
We're now standing in front of Island Queen. And Eleanor, what strikes me about this painting is that it has many more techniques and things going on than some of the other paintings, color and textures and added on things such as beads. Can you talk a little bit about this piece?
I had a lot of fun doing this painting. Actually, it started out as one thing and turned out to be something else, and that often happens when you're working. I tend to sometimes work on 2 and 3 paintings at a time, and this was one that I had started and put down because I put it aside because I wasn't happy with the way it turned out. Then I just let loose and I developed the figure, and I decided it would be like an homage to islands, to the Caribbean, which is my heritage, and the richness of that community with the green, beautiful greens that are so prevalent in the islands. And this is another female figure, and she's sort of loose. She's wearing different kinds of textured papers, and then I embellished the papers with beads to make her sparkle. So this is a fun piece. There are no hidden messages. She doesn't have a face because she doesn't need one. She's too beautiful with her clothes. And it's just a simple composition, but it's one that I really think I had a lot of fun doing.
So when you say she's loose, can you be a little bit more specific?
Well, her arms are indicated, and her neck and head and her body is sort of very diffused. So it's not one that has rigid lines or straight curves. It's very, very loose and fluid.
Now, what exactly is this material here, this purple sort of feathery boa thing?
It's a special kind of paper that I get. It's imported, and I like to use it because I can rip it and glue it down, and it gives me that wonderful freedom that I like, as you can see.
And now the beads here are a wonderful addition that aren't on any of the other paintings, at least that I've noticed.
That's why I'm saying this was a piece that I had a lot of fun with.
So you were sort of loose in terms of your own expression. So then is this sort of a self-portrait of
I don't think so. It might be an example of some other kinds of pieces I might do in a similar way. But as I said, as an artist, you're constantly growing and you're constantly experimenting.
So do you think you took some risks on this painting?
Yes, I think I did.
Interesting.
I think I did.
Very good. So how about if we look at some other paintings?
Okay, let's look at another one.
We're now at the end of our tour of Color Matters. Eleanor, I'd like for you to take a moment and tell us about Seated Woman.
Well, this is a very interesting piece. I really enjoyed doing this piece. It's a classic pose. It's simply the pose of a woman seated with her hands folded. What I think I have done to make it different and interesting is to use fabric in the hair, in the headdress, fabric, in accents around and inside of the composition, as well as different types of papers once again. So this is a very multimedia piece. I've used minimal paint and it's mostly texture. Once again, there are no features in the face. As I said before, I don't feel that it's necessary. It's mounted on a three-dimensional kind of a canvas, so the image continues around the side of the painting. I'd like to thank Joe, and I'd like to thank MCC for having me here at this exhibition. I think the exhibition has been mounted beautifully. I'd like to encourage anyone who's interested in seeing any more of my artwork to visit the Art Uptown Gallery on Main Street in Sarasota. Thanks, Joe.
Eleanor, I want to thank you too. It's been a wonderful opportunity to have you here at Manatee Community College. You've been a wonderful supporter of the college and of the art gallery for many years. It's a pleasure to have you here, to be able to do this walkthrough with you, and to hear you share your intimate thoughts with us about your art. It's been wonderfully illuminating, and I think it means a lot to us as a community to do more than just see the work, but to actually hear what it means to the artist to produce her work. So you're welcome, and thank you. And on behalf of Manatee Community College, I want to thank you. The exhibition will be on view through February the 21st. You can visit the gallery Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And please come see the show. There are many other paintings that we just didn't have time to talk about in particular. But see the show, and do please visit your website.
Yes, my website is www.eleanormerritt.com, and I'm constantly updating it.
Very good. Thank you again.
Thanks, Joe.
And I look forward to having an exhibition of yours in the future.
Look forward to it.
Not too far away.
Keep me working.
Thank you.
Thanks.